everyone. It's 5 o'clock here in Washington, D.C. I'm Alicia Menendez in for Nicole Wallace. The Trump administration's targeting of academics over their political speech, it is escalating as the administration appears to be setting its sights on those who have spoken up about Russia's invasion of Ukraine. NBC News is reporting that a Russian medical researcher at Harvard University, Ksenia Petrova, is right now in a holding cell in a Louisiana immigration facility after being arrested at a Boston airport last month. Her lawyer said Petrova is fighting the possible deportation back to Russia for fear of persecution and jail time over her protest condemning the Ukraine war. NBC News reports this about the circumstances of Petrova's arrest. Quote, on February 16th, Petrova returned to Boston while awaiting her luggage. Two Customs and Border Patrol CBP officers took her into a room to inspect her luggage and searched her phone, her lawyer said. Inside, officers found a sample of frog embryos from her research, a customs violation. While this should normally result in a $500 fine and forfeiture of the items, instead, Petrova's visa was canceled. Her lawyers say that the cancellation was illegal, telling NBC News that while CBP can cancel visas, they need a reason to merit it. And in Petrova's case, they did not give one. Petrova's lawyer says she is set to present her case to an immigration judge after begging CBP not to notify the Russian consul about her case, saying, quote, I cannot go to Russia. I will be persecuted there, establishing what's known as credible fear and allowing her to request asylum. Petrova's arrest appears to mark a new phase in the Trump administration's crackdown on political speech. NBC News notes that while the Trump administration has revoked hundreds of student visas and appeared to target scholars for activism, many of those individuals had been involved in free speech protests on campuses decrying human rights violations in Gaza in the Israel-Hamas war. Petrova's case appears unique, however, as her activism is not related to the Israel-Hamas war, but opposing the Russian war in Ukraine. Petrova's hearing before an immigration judge is set for May 7th. This warning sign that the Trump administration could come for any speech it disagrees with is where we start with some of our favorite reporters and friends. Immigration attorney and former president of the American Immigration Lawyers Association, Alan Orr, is here, plus foreign policy and national security analyst and columnist at The Daily Beast, David Rothkopf, and with me at the table, Democratic strategist and former senior advisor for the Harris-Walz 2024 campaign, Ian Sams is here. It is good to see you all. Alan, is it normal for someone to have their visa canceled over a customs violation?
It is not normal, and this whole thing is atypical in so many ways, and it's really challenging that the world's strongest democracy is meeting a challenge of ideals with handcuffs, and this arrest is one, very costly. It's 20% more expensive to keep someone detained than to allow them to enter the country, and she is not a flight risk. So all of this is irregular to any immigration procedures that we've ever had in the past.
And talk to me about the lack of transparency around this case, which is a through line we have seen in many of these immigration cases where this administration is testing the rule of law.
We believe that this administration is working backwards. They're going after people, targeting them, arresting them, and then trying to make the case later, saying that there's a reason, but we can't tell you the reason for security purposes for individuals who've been in the country for some time. So either they were a risk all this time before because they were processed for visas before and have traveled in and out of the United States, and they were aware of their presence, or something recently has happened that we should be made aware of. Embryos, frog embryos, is not a national security risk.
David, Petrova's lawyer told the Harvard campus newspaper this, quote, she cannot return to Russia without being jailed or harmed. It's going to be suicide for her to go back. Talk us through what happens if she were to be sent back to Russia.
I think it'd be catastrophic on a number of levels. It'd be catastrophic for her because, of course, she has spoken out against the Putin regime, and the Putin regime takes a very hostile stance on that. I think it would also be catastrophic for the U.S. because it would at that point show that the United States is working hand in glove with Putin on some of the repression that he's involved with. And I think finally it's catastrophic because, you know, this is just another case, and there are many, many now, the State Department says 300, where the United States is taking a very harsh stance towards people for coming into the United States because of their ideas. And that's going to lead to No academics coming to the United States, no conferences in the United States, no tourists coming to the United States, academic institutions suffering in the United States, rural people who rely on doctors who from overseas suffering in the United States. So it works on many levels. All of them are very bad.
The irony of their claiming to be proponents, advocates of free speech, and then using that speech as a premise for which to deport people in this country should alarm everyone.
Yeah, and I think politically speaking, it's a huge risk that they're taking to kind of flip the script on their own positions on free speech. I remember when I was working in the White House, we were dealing with an investigation from Jim Jordan where he was pretending to be this champion of free speech. And now you have a situation where you have people who are in this country legally, who are academics, who are studying, who have come to America to either advance their studies or to find jobs in high-tech fields and contribute to the American economy, are being swept up, rounded up from the streets of their hometowns where they're living right now and put in detention without being able to access their lawyers, without people often knowing where they are. I think that when Trump ran and promised that he would go after violent, gang members who were invading, quote unquote, this country illegally, and saying that he would deport them, there's a palette for that in the country right now, and people were okay with that. But I think that people see this, and it's something completely different, something where they see it as an indiscriminate sweeping up of people who don't deserve it and being forced into these horrible circumstances. And so I think that as this progresses through the courts, I'm sure as they've mentioned, there's going to be a lot of court cases trying to overturn some of these decisions to hold these people. But there's also going to be a political shift where I think people are going to say, look, they're not doing this the way that I thought they were going to do it at the same time that we're seeing sort of the economic circumstances that we're in right now.
Jared, at the heart of the Trump administration's political argument is often that immigrants are changing the fabric of this nation. And it is appalling to watch this administration by taking a sledgehammer to the rule of law, by taking a sledgehammer to free speech, in actuality, be the ones who are changing the fabric of this nation. We used to be a place that received people from other countries who were not free to speak, who were not free to protest in those countries. We are now becoming the country that sends people away. And what I want to be clear about is this isn't about one case. This isn't just about immigration. This is about who we are as Americans and what we believe that this country stands for.
Well, that's right. We were the bright, shining city on the hill. One of the reasons was because we gave people certain rights and we protected them, notably the right to free speech. These cases are an example of the suppression of free speech under this administration, but they're only one example. Yesterday, the president issued an executive order saying he wants to shut down certain kinds of exhibits in the Smithsonian. They've taken over the Kennedy Center to make sure there's no DEI there. They're intimidating universities. They're intimidating law firms, saying, we don't want you to embrace people with different ideas. We don't want you to publicly allow the discussion of different ideas, and so on. And so, forgive me, the list goes on. And in every case, we are cutting down on the fundamental rights of Americans.
I want to ask you, Alan, about the timeline that we are talking about here, because we've seen judges try to pump the brakes on a number of these orders from the Trump administration. Petrova's lawyer says that even if she is granted asylum, the government could appeal. Quote, I would love to say that she's going to know where she stands in a couple of months and she'll be out if she gets approved, but we don't know that. How long could she remain in an ICE facility for, let's be clear, coming into the country with a frog embryo?
So indefinite detention right now, because of the firing of immigration judges and the depletion of those people in the Department of Justice, could take 4 to 5 years just to get the processing done and all of the appeals. That's the cost of the government and her attorney time. But in addition to that, I also want to say about these scholars, 43 of the 112 Nobel Prize winners of the United States were immigrants. More than 10 countries have issued travel advisories to come to the United States because of what's happening at our borders. It is time for us to understand that as part of this global society, we need to make sure that immigrants and business is welcome here, because we cannot survive alone.
I'm sure you saw this, Ian. Yesterday, Secretary of State Marco Rubio says that the State Department has revoked at least 300 student visas as part of their crackdown on student activists. Going back to something you said, I think they narratively thought they were going to choose individuals who would be less sympathetic for a variety of reasons in the eyes of the American public. They already seem to be miscalculating where that line is for folks and the extent to which the lives of immigrants in this country intersects with the lives of U.S. citizens in this country. You cannot simply pull a person out of their community without ripple effects throughout that entire community.
Totally. And I was actually thinking about this. You know, Elon Musk and Melania Trump are two of the closest people in the world to the president. They both came to this country on visas just like this, trying to learn, trying to study, trying to contribute economically, whether it was starting a business in Silicon Valley for Elon or modeling for Melania. Imagine if back then we had Twitter and just Elon had popped off and said something about apartheid that the regime in Washington didn't like and kicked him out of the country. That's not how the system works. I think that the folks in power right now, whether it's Trump or Stephen Miller or whoever, are bulldozing these basic premises, thinking that they have popular support for what they're doing. And I think that what they're going to forget is that a lot of people know people who are like this. And when they see people in their communities who are getting ripped away and put into detention facilities, or worse, sent to El Salvador to basically a gulag without any due process whatsoever. I think that there's going to be a negative political effect for that because people don't want to see people who are playing by the rules and doing the right thing punished like this. We saw this in the first Trump administration with the blowback about the way that Trump was attacking dreamers who were in this country. And so I think that as we move forward in this storyline, I think that you may start to see Trump pull back on some of these more aggressive measures as the videos of people getting swept up off the streets go viral. He may know that there's some downside for this for them politically.
David, if you are Russia, if you are Vladimir Putin and you watch the United States detain, threaten to deport a Russian scientist, in part because they have expressed sympathy for Ukraine. What are you thinking inside Russia about your relationship with the United States?
Well, I think you're thinking that you've achieved total victory. The United States has switched side on Ukraine. The United States has switched side and is now going against NATO in multiple ways. We had the vice president in Greenland today attacking publicly a NATO ally, Denmark. The United States has threatened Canada. The United States has gotten rid of most of the parts of the U.S. government that target Russia for interfering in elections or the bad doings of Russian oligarchs and so forth. And this would just be one more example of this administration saying our priorities lie not with the American people, not with our allies, but with the Kremlin.
You had authoritarian expert, Professor Timothy Snyder, who has left the U.S. to now teach in Canada over concerns about Trump's authoritarianism, posting this on Blue Sky. Quote, "If you accept that non-citizens have no right to due process, you are accepting that citizens have no right to due process. All the government has to do is claim that you are not a citizen. Without due process, you have no chance to prove the contrary." Alan, I think that is exactly right. And I think it is part of what is incumbent upon all of us to communicate, which is they are testing these legal theories and legal boundaries on immigrants with the possibility of extending it to American citizens. Do you agree?
That's 100% right. That's the whole talk behind denaturalization. Birthright citizenship challenges. It's the concept that you're never American once you go through the process and that you're never okay because they want to reopen cases. It's the focus of un-Americanizing people that are America and forgetting who they are.
This is the long tail of Stephen Miller. And I think that, to your point, there was a point at which people thought us and them, and now they're realizing that the us and them was much blurrier than perhaps they had understood.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of frightening to think about that we have people that ICE has swept up and sent to a prison in El Salvador, and we don't even know anything about them. There are people who are there that we don't know what their status is. And if you don't know what their status is, who knows where this will go? You see Trump pushing the boundaries over and over again, targeting law firms, targeting the media, doing these actions with immigrants, all as test cases to see how much authoritarian power he can get. And we're putting faith in the courts that there's going to be some sense of normalcy. There is, I think, a big political risk if he rejects court rulings that say some of these actions are illegal. We've seen polling just in the last month that even majorities of Republicans say that if a court orders something is illegal and shouldn't be done, that he should follow it. But you never know. We'll see what happens. We'll see if he does decide to press his hand even further and reject, even if courts strike down some of these measures. And so, we're really at the bounds of anywhere we've ever been before as a country. And I think what it's going to take is people sort of getting invested and engaged and fighting back against what they see and speaking out against what they see and not cowering in fear, because these guys love the idea that they can keep everybody in fear and prevent people from standing up and doing something about it.
David, I am curious, as you have covered these stories in other countries under other regimes, what history tells us about the role of individuals standing up. In the case of something like this, in the case of Petrova, a group of concerned citizens coming forward and saying, this is not the country I know, this is not the country I choose to live in.
I think it's absolutely critical in this country. And look, we've seen it around the world recently. 1 million people took to the streets in Belgrade not so long ago, in a country of 7 million people, to protest that government. You've seen protests in Hungary against an authoritarian government that the Trump regime likes to emulate. We've seen it in Georgia. We've seen it in Israel. These kind of protests make a difference. And I think it's very important for the American people to stand up and say, we won't be intimidated. We will stand up for our fundamental rights. Just to conclude, one of the points you made at the beginning about immigrants is really important to underscore. Immigrants are an essential part of the fabric of the United States and have made this country what it is. Turning away immigrants will not only diminish us in terms of our own ideals, it'll weaken us in the world. And we need to remember that. We need to remember who we are and how we got here.
David Rothkopf, Alan Orr, Ian Sams, thank you all so much for getting us started.